The headlights caught her just in time. A woman slumped by the guardrail, her dress torn, blood streaking down her arm. My girls were asleep in the back seat when I pulled over, heart hammering, not knowing who she was or why no one else had stopped. I only knew I couldn't drive away. The narrow country road unwound like a ribbon in the dark, and Michael let the old pickup hum along at a patient pace, two sleeping shapes buckled in the back. Lily's head had slid against Emma's shoulder somewhere past the last turnoff, their breaths falling into the same soft rhythm that always calmed him on long drives. He checked the rear view and smiled. Two anchors tied to his life, two reasons to keep the world steady no matter what it asked of him. The dashboard clock glowed a quiet reassurance. They would be home soon. Then the headlights swept over a shape that didn't belong. A sleek black car stood angled at the shoulder as if it had tried to pull farther and ran out of luck. Hazard lights pulsed a weak orange, an eyelid trying not to close. A thread of smoke lifted from the open hood and bent with the night breeze. Michael's hands tightened on the wheel, not from fear but from a practiced readiness, the same reflex he had for a crying child or a buckled fence. He eased off the gas and signaled out of habit, though the only witnesses were crickets and the moon. "Girls," he said, keeping his voice low so the sound wouldn't break too much of their sleep. "We're pulling over for a second." The truck rattled as it settled onto the gravel shoulder. He killed the high beams and let the hazards tick a metronome into the stillness. At first, all he saw was the car, perfect lines, city money stranded in farm country. Then movement. A figure by the guardrail, one sleeve torn, one hand pressed to her arm. She was trying to sit upright with the careful dignity of someone refusing to collapse. Michael's door thumped open. The night air was cooler than he expected, full of damp grass and the faint, metallic scent of engine trouble. He reached behind his seat for the first aid kit he could find without looking. Habit, like so much of his life. "Stay in the truck, girls," he said, firmer now. Buckles creaked as the sisters stirred. "Daddy." Emma's voice floated up, drowsy. "It's okay. Just keep your belts on." He crossed the small distance at a steady jog. The woman looked up at him, eyes bright with pain and exhaustion, face pale beneath the night's silver wash. "I called for help," she said, breath catching. "But no one came." "You're not alone anymore," he answered, the words coming the way a hand knows how to catch a falling glass. He knelt beside her and flipped the kit open. Gauze, antiseptic, tape. He'd used the same items on skinned knees and a neighbor's cut thumb. The motions felt the same. Be gentle. Be sure. Don't make promises you can't keep. She winced as he pressed gauze to the bleeding line on her arm. "Hold still," he said softly. "It isn't too deep. We'll keep pressure on it." Her gaze searched his face as if measuring the steadiness there. Up close, he saw she wore an evening dress, something elegant that didn't belong anywhere near ditches and gravel. A sliver of the fabric had snagged on the guardrail. Gold thread glinted where the moon angled right. Whoever she was, wherever she had been heading, the road had other ideas. "Why stop for me?" she asked after a beat, voice thin but insistent. "Most people wouldn't." "Because you needed help," he said, glancing toward the truck. Two silhouettes sat upright now, for curious eyes shining faintly through the glass. "That's enough reason." He checked the cut again, replaced the gauze, taped it cleanly, then offered his hand. She hesitated, not with fear, he thought, but pride adjusting to necessity, and took it. The weight of her against his shoulder felt like both trust and apology. Gravel shifted under their feet as he guided her toward the passenger side of the truck. He opened the door and the cab light clicked on, spilling a small circle of home into the night. Lily and Emma leaned forward, wide-eyed and solemn with the seriousness children grant to injury. "Daddy, is she going to be okay?" Emma asked, voice barely above a whisper. "She'll be fine," Michael said, and felt the truth of it settle into him as he helped the woman climb in. "We're heading to the hospital." The woman drew a breath as she sat, taking in the worn bench seat, the scuffed floor mat, a crayon wedged where the seat met the door. Whatever world she came from, it didn't have this kind of clutter. But her shoulders loosened a fraction, and gratitude warmed her expression. Michael closed the door gently and circled back to the driver's side. The road before him looked the same as it had 5 minutes earlier, but the night felt different, as if a hinge had turned and something was beginning to swing open. He put the truck in gear, checked his mirrors, and pulled onto the empty lane. The blinking hazards of the black car fell away behind them like a heartbeat calming. In the quiet that followed, the truck's engine became a low lullaby. No one spoke. The woman kept her bandaged arm cradled close. Lily and Emma watched her with the serious curiosity of children meeting a story at the moment it enters their own. Michael kept his eyes on the asphalt ribbon, but he felt the shape of the moment forming, the way you can feel weather change before the wind arrives. He had promised his daughter's safety, whatever it took. Tonight the promise seemed to have grown to include a stranger with a torn sleeve and a steady gaze. He didn't know her name. He didn't need to. Not yet. What mattered was the simple math of care. Someone was hurt, and he had two little girls watching to see what a person does when it's dark and someone needs help. The fields slid by, invisible but present, and the hospital lights would come into view soon enough. For now, the cab held its own soft constellation. Two girls awake but calm, a woman holding still against pain, and a father who understood that some nights change everything without raising their voice. The truck's heater blew a faint stream of warm air across the cabin, but it did little to soften the sharp sting of antiseptic as Michael pressed fresh gauze to the woman's arm. The overhead light cast a muted glow, showing the line of blood that had trickled down to her wrist. He worked with a calm focus that came from years of patching scraped knees and stubborn machinery. Always the same principle: steady hands, no wasted motion, reassure while you work. The woman inhaled through her teeth, biting back a sound. "It burns," she admitted, voice unsteady. "I know," he said, his tone even, like a mechanic talking to a reluctant engine. "Means it's clean. Hold still a little longer." Her eyes flicked toward his face, studying him as though weighing the quiet authority in his words. She noticed the faint lines of fatigue under his eyes, the kind worn into a man by early mornings and long days. He wasn't dressed like anyone from her world. Faded work shirt, sleeves rolled, calloused knuckles that belonged to tools, not cufflinks. And yet, those same hands treated her wound with surprising gentleness. From the back seat came the rustle of fabric and a whisper. "Daddy." Lily's voice carried the worry of someone not quite old enough to understand, but old enough to feel when something was wrong. Michael didn't look away from the wound. "It's okay, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." But neither daughter moved to obey. Emma leaned forward, her chin just above the seat belt. "She looks hurt," she said softly, the words almost an apology. The woman's lips curved in a tired attempt at reassurance. "I'll be all right, darling," she murmured. Her accent carried polish, the kind shaped in boardrooms and formal dinners, but the tenderness in her tone was universal. Emma sank back a little, comforted. Michael secured the final strip of tape, then gently tested the bandage with his fingertips. "That should hold," he said, sliding the kit aside. He lifted his gaze to hers, and for a moment, the cabin felt strangely still, just her dark eyes locked onto his steady blue ones. Neither spoke, but the weight of the silence carried meaning. She had been alone until now, and now she wasn't. She broke it first. "Why stop for me? Most people wouldn't." Michael let the question hang for a second before answering. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "No drama, no explanation. That's enough reason." Her throat tightened at the words, unexpected emotion stirring. She'd been surrounded by people her whole life, assistants, colleagues, drivers. But in the lonely minutes on that road, none of them had been there. This stranger, with grease still faint on his cuffs, had been the one to stop. He shifted to help her sit up straighter. "Can you stand?" Her pride urged her to say yes, but the throb in her arm said otherwise. She hesitated, then nodded faintly. When he offered his hand, she accepted, fingers brushing against the roughness of his palm. It startled her. So solid, so unshakable, as if he carried not just her weight, but the weight of whatever storm had placed her here. As she rose, the world tilted. She steadied herself against his shoulder, surprised at the instinctive trust she felt in leaning on him. He guided her carefully, each step measured, until they reached the passenger side. He opened the door with a gentle tug, and the cab light bloomed again, illuminating two young faces watching with wide-eyed concern. "Daddy, is she going to be okay?" Emma asked, voice small but urgent. "She'll be fine," Michael said, his voice softening as he glanced back at them. "She just needs a hospital. That's where we're headed." The woman eased herself onto the seat, her movements careful, her pride folding into gratitude. She glanced at the girls again, their innocence like a mirror reflecting everything she hadn't known she was missing. Her chest tightened, not just from the pain in her arm, but from something deeper, something unnameable. The girls stared openly. Lily whispered to Emma, though the woman caught it anyway. "She's pretty." A faint laugh escaped the woman's lips, surprising even herself. "Thank you," she whispered back, touched in a way she couldn't quite explain. Michael closed the door gently, sealing the warmth of the cab around them, then circled back to the driver's side. As he slid in, he gave his daughters a brief look in the mirror. "Seat belts tight," he reminded, his voice calm but carrying that protective undertone they both trusted without question. They nodded in unison, their little faces still lit with curiosity. The woman leaned back against the worn seat, the fabric unfamiliar, yet oddly comforting. She let her gaze rest on the two girls, then on the man beside her, his eyes fixed on the road, his jaw set with the calm determination of someone who had decided, without hesitation, to see her safe. For the first time that night, she let out a slow breath and felt a flicker of something that hadn't touched her in years. Safety, freely given, without price or expectation. The truck rumbled back onto the road, its headlights carving a narrow path through the dark. Michael kept both hands steady on the wheel, his gaze locked forward, but his mind was alive with quiet calculations. He knew the nearest hospital was 30 minutes away if he pushed the speed, longer if the old engine decided to complain. He pressed his foot just enough to coax more speed without jolting the woman beside him. She leaned against the door, her injured arm cradled close, face pale in the glow from the dash. The girls had shaken off sleep now. Emma held Lily's hand, a habit they'd had since preschool, a little chain of comfort against anything strange. Their eyes darted between their father and the stranger in the front seat. The cabin brimmed with questions neither dared to ask aloud. Michael cleared his throat once, the sound low and practical. "You'll need stitches, but the bleeding's slowed," he said, more to fill the space than because she didn't know. She turned her head slightly, studying his profile. "You sound certain." He shrugged. "Raised 2 kids alone. You learn a little of everything. Cooking, fixing engines, bandaging scrapes. Guess it carries over." That quiet pride, almost hidden under the plain words, struck her harder than she expected. She glanced back at the girls. They were watching her with the pure intensity only children have, as if their father's calm had convinced them she must be safe. Their trust in him was unshakable, and for the first time she wondered what it would feel like to belong in a circle like that. The road rolled beneath them, lined by shadowed fields and the occasional flicker of a farmhouse light. Crickets chirped beyond the closed windows, steady and indifferent. Inside the cab, silence layered itself in different textures. Michael's restraint, the girl's curiosity, the woman's exhaustion. She broke it finally. "I don't even know your name." "Michael," he said, eyes still on the road. "Michael," she repeated, letting the sound settle. "And your daughters?" He glanced briefly into the rear view. "Lily and Emma. Don't worry, they're tougher than they look." Emma piped up before shyness could stop her. "I'm 6, she declared proudly, squeezing her sister's hand. "Lily's 8. The woman's lips curved faintly, the first real smile of the night. "Nice to meet you both," she said softly. Lily tilted her head, studying her the way she studied animals at the farm down the road. Curious, careful. "What's your name?" she asked. The woman hesitated, instinct tugging at her to guard her identity. In her world, names opened doors, headlines, and expectations. But in this truck, with 2 innocent faces waiting, she found herself answering without the shield she usually wore. "Victoria," she said simply. "Victoria," Emma echoed, as though trying out the shape of it. Michael's hands tightened briefly on the wheel at the sound of the name, not from recognition but from something else. Maybe the reminder that she was real, not just a wounded stranger by the roadside. Victoria let her head rest lightly against the glass, eyes tracing the blur of fence posts whipping by. For years she had lived in polished spaces, boardrooms, penthouses, black cars with tinted windows. Yet here, in an old pickup with a farmer and 2 wide-eyed girls, she felt a strange sense of being seen in her simplest form. Tired, hurt, human. The hospital lights finally broke the horizon, a soft glow against the night sky. Relief edged into Michael's chest. He slowed at the turn, gravel crunching under the tires. "We're here," he said quietly. Victoria's eyes flicked from the lights to his face, and though no words followed, she felt the truth of what had just unfolded. This wasn't just rescue. It was the beginning of a story she hadn't expected to enter. And Michael, guiding the truck into the lot, felt it too. The night had shifted something he couldn't yet name. The farmhouse settled back into its rhythms as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Morning chores still demanded attention, mending fences, coaxing the tractor into life, checking that the feed bins were full. The alarm clock still rang too early. Lily and Emma still tumbled into the kitchen with tangled hair and mismatched socks, and Michael still found himself gulping coffee while packing school lunches with one hand. On the surface, everything was the same, but beneath the routines, something lingered. That night on the roadside refused to fold neatly into memory. Michael caught himself replaying details he shouldn't care about. The way Victoria had whispered through the pain, the look in her eyes when she asked why he stopped, the strange stillness in the truck as though the world had tilted. He tried to shove the thoughts aside with the same stubbornness he used on the tractor's clogged fuel line. Yet no matter how hard he worked, she remained there in the background, an echo that wouldn't quiet. SD 111091. At the breakfast table, Emma noticed it first. "Daddy," she asked one morning, spoon clinking against her cereal bowl, "is the lady okay? The one you helped?" Michael froze briefly, toast halfway to his mouth. He lowered it, clearing his throat. "She's fine. The doctors took care of her." "Will we see her again?" Lily asked, her tone more measured, older somehow. Michael reached for the jam jar, buying a moment. "I don't know. People like her, they have their own lives to get back to." Yet even as he said it, he wondered why the thought of not seeing her again pressed uncomfortably against his chest. He told himself it was because the girls had been affected, that he didn't want them to cling to false hope. But another part of him, the part that had noticed her smile softening at his daughter's voices, knew the truth was more complicated. Days stretched into weeks. The farm carried on, a self-contained world. Michael worked until his muscles ached, tucked the girls into bed with bedtime stories he only half remembered from his own childhood, and let exhaustion blur the edges of longing he wouldn't name. But some evenings, while standing on the porch, he would catch himself staring down the long dirt road, as if expecting headlights that never appeared. And then there was the odd intrusion of recognition. He didn't read magazines, didn't watch the kind of news that covered the lives of the wealthy, but one afternoon at the feed store a headline caught his eye on a discarded newspaper. A photograph, sleek hair, sharp suit, the same eyes he had seen that night, filled with pain. Victoria Hale, the caption named her. Business leader, millionaire. A woman from a world measured in shares and spotlights. Michael folded the paper and put it back on the counter without buying it. He told himself it didn't matter. But when he returned home, the farmhouse felt smaller, as though the walls knew he was holding a secret from his own daughters. That night, as he stood at the sink washing dishes, Emma appeared in the doorway, dragging her blanket behind her. "Daddy," she said, rubbing her eyes. "Do you think she remembers us?" He dried his hands and crouched, pulling her close. "I think," he said carefully, "when people go through hard things, they remember the ones who stood with them, even if it was only for a little while." Emma nodded, her face pressing against his shoulder. She seemed satisfied with that answer. Michael wasn't sure he was. In the quiet hours, after the girls were asleep, he sat sometimes on the porch with a mug of cooling coffee. The fields stretched wide and dark, the night insects humming their endless chorus. He told himself to let it go, to stop wondering about a woman whose life ran parallel to his only by chance. And yet, every time the breeze carried the faintest trace of smoke from the old pickup's exhaust, he remembered headlights flashing on a black car, a torn sleeve, a voice whispering you're not alone anymore. Life went on, but not untouched. The night had carved itself into the fabric of his days, and though he didn't know it yet, the thread was pulling him toward a future he hadn't dared imagine. The late afternoon sun slanted across the yard, gilding the farmhouse in tired gold. Michael had just finished another round with the stubborn tractor, his hands dark with grease, his shirt clinging from the heat. He wiped his palms on an old rag, already thinking about dinner, scrambled eggs, maybe, or leftover stew. Life, for all its small demands, had begun to feel predictable again. And then he heard it, the low, unmistakable hum of an engine too refined for these roads. At first, he thought it was a neighbor, but the shine of black paint cresting the hill told him otherwise. The car rolled to a stop by the fence line, dust curling around its polished wheels. Even before the door opened, Lily and Emma shrieked, a sound of pure delight that made Michael's stomach knot. They tore across the yard barefoot, hair flying, their cries carrying a name he hadn't expected to hear again. Miss Victoria. The back door swung open and Victoria stepped out, dressed more simply than the night he found her, but still with that air of elegance that clashed with the dirt road. She barely had time to steady herself before two small bodies flung into her arms. She laughed, an unguarded, bright sound that startled even her, and crouched to embrace them, heedless of the dust that clung to her clothes. Michael stayed where he was for a moment, rag clenched in one fist. He hadn't prepared for this. Gratitude was one thing. Showing up here, where his life was stripped of polish, was something else entirely. Finally, he crossed the yard, his steps slower than his daughter's eager rush. "You didn't have to come all this way," he said, tone practical, almost curt. Victoria straightened, brushing hair back from her face, her smile softening when her eyes met his. "I wanted to," she replied simply. "I owed you more than just a thank you." And her gaze flicked to the girls, who clung to her hands as though they had known her all their lives. "I think I owed them a visit, too." Michael shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the sudden warmth in his daughter's faces. "You're busy. You've got a life." "I do," she interrupted gently. "But that night, when you stopped for me, I realized something. I've spent years surrounded by everything money could buy. Cars, houses, respect. And yet, none of it felt real." The words caught him off guard. He expected polished thanks, a token gesture, not confession. He looked at her closely. There was no press here, no audience, no advantage to be gained. Just truth. Emma tugged her hand. "Do you want to see our dog?" she asked brightly. "He runs faster than Lily, but not faster than me." Victoria laughed again, bending to the child's level. "I'd love to see him," she said, and let herself be pulled toward the porch. Lily joined in, tugging the other hand, and soon Victoria was caught between them, her expensive shoes sinking into the soft earth. Michael followed, still wiping grease from his palms, but his gaze lingered. It wasn't just surprise at her presence. It was something deeper. Watching his daughters welcome her with the easy openness only children possessed, he felt a part of himself stir that had been buried beneath years of solitude and work. On the porch, the dog bounded forward, paws muddy, tongue lolling. Victoria bent to greet him without hesitation, and when his muddy prints streaked across her tailored coat, she only laughed harder. The girls squealed with delight, wrapping themselves around her in a tangle of giggles. Michael leaned against the porch post, arms folded, watching the scene unfold with wary fascination. This wasn't her world, yet she didn't seem out of place. If anything, she seemed relieved, as though stepping into something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. For the first time since that night, Michael allowed himself to consider that maybe the rescue hadn't ended at the hospital doors. Maybe it had only just begun. Victoria did not disappear after that first visit. Instead, her presence wove itself into the fabric of Michael's days like a thread that appeared uninvited but soon looked as though it had always belonged. Each time her sleek black car appeared at the end of the dirt road, Lily and Emma bolted from the porch as though they'd been waiting for her all along. Their shrieks of delight echoed across the fields, carrying a joy that Michael found both infectious and unsettling. At first, he tried to keep a deliberate distance. He would linger by the shed, tools in hand, fixing what didn't truly need fixing. He told himself that the girls needed the attention more than he did, that Victoria's visits were about gratitude, about recovery, about repaying kindness. But it became harder to ignore how easily she slipped into their little world. She came with stories that made Lily's eyes widen and Emma giggle until she hiccuped. She listened with patient interest to schoolyard dramas, asked thoughtful questions about spelling tests, and clapped as though Emma's uneven cartwheel were a circus act. When she laughed, it was different from the poised smiles that accompanied her magazine photos. This laughter was unguarded, catching her by surprise, leaving her brushing tears from her cheeks with genuine astonishment. Even the dog, usually suspicious of outsiders, followed her around the yard as though he had appointed himself her shadow. One muddy afternoon, he leapt onto the porch with paws wet from the creek, plastering a streak across Victoria's dress. Michael had expected irritation, maybe a sharp word. Instead, she burst out laughing, trying to steady the wriggling animal while the girls rolled on the steps with glee. "I suppose," she said breathlessly, "this is the cost of admission." Michael had stood in the doorway watching, grease still on his hands, and something in his chest loosened at the sight. Evenings brought quieter moments. Sometimes Victoria sat at the kitchen table with a steaming mug of tea, listening to the rain drum on the roof. The girls would chatter around her, showing her drawings or asking her to braid their hair. She fumbled the braids at first, her fingers too practiced in signing contracts rather than weaving strands. But Lily, patient as an old soul, guided her through it. When Victoria finally managed a lopsided but secure braid, the girl hugged her as if she had handed her the moon. One evening, Michael found them huddled in the living room, the dog at their feet, Victoria reading aloud from one of Lily's well-worn books. Her voice carried a warmth that surprised him, softening each line. The girls leaned against her, eyes heavy, safe in her presence. Michael stood at the doorway, silent, torn between gratitude and an ache he couldn't quite name. It wasn't lost on him that their worlds were still miles apart. Each time a driver in a pressed suit waited outside in the idling car, Michael was reminded of the gulf. And yet, when Victoria finally rose to leave, brushing a strand of hair from her face, her eyes often lingered on the farmhouse walls, on the girls, and sometimes, hesitantly, on him. The distance between them remained, but it was narrowing, one shared laugh, one quiet evening, one muddy paw print at a time. Michael, who had spent years convincing himself that change was for other people, found himself listening for the sound of tires on gravel, hoping against his better judgment. And though he never said it aloud, he knew the truth. His daughters were not the only ones who lit up when Victoria came. The day had been long, tractors refusing to start, fence posts leaning after the last storm, and a list of chores that always seemed to grow faster than he could cross them off. By the time Michael rinsed the grease from his hands at the outdoor pump, the horizon was already melting into gold. He was thinking about supper when he heard it, the low purr of a car too polished for this road. He didn't move at first, but the squeals of Lily and Emma carried across the yard, feet pounding the porch steps before he even turned. Dust plumed as the black car stopped, the girls racing forward with open arms. Victoria stepped out, her heels sinking into the grass, but she hardly noticed. Two small bodies collided with her, and she dropped to her knees, laughing, gathering them close. Michael wiped his palms on a rag, heart tugging between weariness and something far softer. He walked across the yard, slower than his daughters, until Victoria stood to face him. Her eyes met his, and in them was a light he hadn't seen before, something gentler than success, richer than wealth. "You didn't have to come all this way," he said, his voice even, but tinged with unease. "I wanted to," she replied. Her tone carried no performance, no polish. "The truth is, I've spent years surrounded by everything money could buy. Cars, houses, respect. But none of it felt real." She paused, glancing at the girls, their laughter ringing in the twilight as they tugged at her hands. "That night you stopped for me, I realized what I had been missing." Michael shifted, wiping the last of the grease from his palms though it no longer mattered. He tried to find words, but honesty was easier for him than eloquence. "I don't have much to offer." Victoria shook her head softly, her voice steady. "You've already given the most important things. Kindness, safety, love." The words hung between them, carried on the warm evening air. Michael felt them sink deep, loosening something in him he had locked away for years. "Come play," Emma cried, tugging Victoria toward the open field. Lily joined, pulling at her other hand. For once, Victoria didn't hesitate. She slipped off her heels and let herself be drawn into their game, laughing as she ran barefoot through the grass, her hair catching the fading sunlight. From the porch, Michael watched. His daughter's laughter twined with Victoria's, the sound rising like a song into the dusk. He saw the careful woman from the glossy photo replaced by someone freer, someone who belonged here among fireflies and children's shouts. And inside him, something shifted. He had spent years believing his life was set. Work, fatherhood, no room for second chances. But standing there, grease still under his nails, Watching Victoria run barefoot with his daughters, he realized the rescue on that lonely road had saved more than her. It had saved him too. It was no longer just chance. It was the beginning of something new, fragile, unexpected, but real.